Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for dropping by. I just had a pretty deep, I think, a deep insight and about Bruno Gruning's teachings. So I've always, when I try and break down and understand Bruno's teachings, I tend to think of it as sort of three components. First of all, there's just Bruno Gruning's teachings as general, meaning everything that Bruno Gruning taught. And then next is the practice of einstellen. And then next is Bruno Gruning as a helper. And, Bruno's role in us learning and practicing these teachings. That's how I've kind of, and maybe fourth is sort of the story of Bruno Gruning, sort of information about his life and placing him within a historical context. That's kind of how, kind of the big picture of how I've understood the Bruno Gruning phenomenon. But I think an error I've made in teaching that way and in sharing it that way is I've overemphasized einstellen, overemphasized tuning in. And the reason why I say that is yes, Bruno Gruning did say, observe your body more and more every day, every hour, every minute, every second. So he called people to practice this, to do this constantly. However, he also said things like to be connected to God. That is everything. And he also said, pull up one more quote. Bruno said, man needs to be connected to God. God wanted no more. This is the true divine teaching. So I think if I were to explain Bruno Gruning's teachings now with this new insight I'm having, I think I would say it's something like this, is all of Bruno Gruning's teachings, everything he taught, and then the real essence of what he taught is being connected to God. And that can include einstellung, and that's a part of it. But, he also said it doesn't matter how a person finds God, just that they find God. And then I would say, Bruno Gruning as a helper, and then sort of some of the history around that. So I feel in some ways that in my own personal life, and then in how I've shared, I'm not saying that I've shared inaccurate information, but it's almost like I've given an inaccurate emphasis to the practice of einstellen. So please do reflect on this and let me know your thoughts and feelings. I'd be very curious to hear other people's feedback. And the thing is, here's where I get to get a little humble, which Bruno called us to do, is I'm not a master by any means. And of all the writings of Bruno Gruning that that we have available to us, I've maybe read, less than 1%. Or I say I know well, like less than 1%. So, so I am truly just not a master and just a human being doing the best I can to practice these things and falling short often, but to practice these things and then to share them. So the thing is, ultimately this path is about following God. It's not even ultimately, I don't even think it's about following the teachings of Bruno Gruning. The teachings of Bruno Gruning have really one intention: to have us to be connected to and following God, to have a direct connection so that we can know God, not have opinions about God, not be able to quote spiritual texts about God, not so that we can quote Bruno Gruning's teachings about God, not so that we have a belief in the mental sense of the word, but we have belief itself, visceral, that visceral direct knowing that goes beyond the mind, that goes beyond anything we've read, that goes beyond anything Bruno Gröning said. And so, in my good moments, that's what I'm just pointing people towards. And so I'll be very curious to hear people's thoughts on this. And then it's very interesting because faith is one of the ways that Bruno Gröning talks about staying connected to God. And so then, even as I share all this, I'm like, maybe faith is really the foundation, but I don't. I think what's the fundamental thing that Bruno Gröning called us to? It's something I always like to get at the root of things. It's a question I ask, but I'm really, when I really reflect on some of the things Bruno Gröning said, he did say only have faith. He did say that, but he also said, it's tricky to really look at Bruno Gröning's teachings holistically, to not just take one teaching and be one thing he said and be like, oh, that's it, but to really try and take into account a lot of what he said. He said only have faith. He also said the only thing that's necessary is that human beings attain self knowledge or self recognition. And then he also said to be connected to God. That is everything. So when I take all those and I put it together, well, I don't quite know how to put it all together yet. But the words that come to me are knowing God directly with faith, the presence of God, just the direct knowing of God through presence. And maybe faith is obviously a prerequisite for that. And so I don't claim to have all the answers. And so just some reflections. So please take that to heart. Let me know your thoughts. My apologies if I have overemphasized Einstein and underemphasized um, underemphasized having the direct knowing, the direct connection. Bruno Gröning said, uh, I'm paraphrasing here, but you have the mandatory obligation. I forget the German word. And he also used another German word, a Scheldigkeit, like a full vocation to take in the divine connection. So that's a very, very strong statement that we have this absolute obligation to be connected. And again, the German word that's translated as connection is Verbindung, to be joined, linked, in communion with God. So, how does this calling, how does this practice of being connected to God, how is it related to Einstein and how is it different? That's something I'm going to be sitting with. But, in my study of other religions and spiritual practices and even meditation, there's this phrase that comes feeling the presence of God. I think that's really, I'm not going to say, oh, I think that's really the essence of what Bruno taught. I'm going to let each one of us really reflect deeply and see what conclusion we come to and see how that being connected to God is related or not. So, well, it's obviously related, but how is it related to the practice of Einstein? I look forward to people tuning in and tuning in and getting their own answers and sharing them. And I'm very much just growing and learning on this path. Very, very far from being a master, like our dear friend Bruno Grunning. Thanks so much. Take care. Much love.